"You don't belong here," 4 words that would cost this luxury medical clinic everything. But the woman in sweatpants they just dismissed had no idea she was about to witness the most expensive mistake of their careers. When Dr. Nia Sacks walked into her own million-dollar clinic, dressed down in a hoodie and sneakers, the staff's shocking treatment revealed a system of discrimination so deep that what happened next would make medical history. Watch as a respected janitor risks his job to speak the truth. A courageous intern secretly records everything, and the moment when Dr. Sacks reveals her true identity sends shockwaves through everyone who thought they knew their place. This isn't just about one woman's fight for dignity, it's about the surgical justice that transformed an entire healthcare system and proved that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones you least expect. Stay until the end to see how 4 words of discrimination became the catalyst for a revolution that's still changing medicine today. You don't belong here. Those 4 words would cost this medical clinic everything they thought they knew about power, but the woman in sweatpants standing at their reception desk had no idea she was about to witness the most expensive mistake of their careers. What happened next will shock you, but first, let me tell you about Dr. Nia Sacks, and why this particular Tuesday morning was about to become legendary. The Meridian Wellness Clinic gleamed like a palace of privilege in downtown Atlanta, its marble floors reflecting the soft glow of crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. This wasn't just any medical facility, this was where celebrities flew in for secret procedures, where tech billionaires brought their families for concierge care, and where the waiting list stretched longer than a presidential campaign. Every surface whispered exclusivity, from the Italian leather chairs to the original artwork adorning walls that had witnessed more wealth than most banks. The air itself seemed expensive, filtered through systems that cost 6 figures and scented with custom aromatherapy that made patients feel like royalty before they even saw a doctor. But on this morning, something was different. Someone was different. Dr. Nia Sacks pushed through the heavy glass doors wearing Nike sweatpants, a faded Howard University hoodie, and sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, and her only accessory was a worn leather backpack that looked like it had survived medical school. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another person who had wandered into the wrong zip code, someone who clearly didn't understand the unspoken dress code of this temple to aesthetic perfection. What they didn't know was that this unassuming woman had revolutionized healthcare for millions of Americans. Dr. Sacks had built her medical empire from nothing, starting with a single clinic in a neighborhood that other doctors had abandoned. She'd fought insurance companies, challenged medical boards, and created treatment protocols that were now studied in medical schools across the country. Her conglomerate, Sacks Medical Solutions, operated over 200 facilities nationwide, employing thousands of healthcare workers and serving communities that had been forgotten by traditional medicine. The Meridian Clinic was her latest experiment in healthcare equity, a partnership with local physicians designed to test whether luxury medical facilities could maintain their standards while serving diverse communities. She'd invested millions in the renovation, handpicked the equipment, and personally approved every hire. The brass nameplate behind the reception desk bore her name as founder, though she wondered if anyone here even bothered to read it anymore. Today's visit wasn't planned. Disturbing rumors had been reaching her office for weeks, whispered complaints about treatment that seemed to depend more on a patient's appearance than their medical needs. Her executive assistant had compiled a file of concerning incidents, each one more troubling than the last. As a black woman who had faced discrimination throughout her medical career, Dr. Sacks knew these patterns intimately. She'd experienced them as a student, as a resident, and even as an attending physician before she'd built her own empire. So she'd decided to see for herself, to experience her own clinic through the eyes of someone who looked like the patients filing these complaints. She'd traded her designer suits for street clothes, removed her jewelry, and driven herself to the clinic in a rental car instead of her usual chauffeured Mercedes. Her team had no idea she was coming. This was pure reconnaissance, the kind of real-world testing that no consultant could provide. As she approached the reception desk, Dr. Sacks felt the familiar weight of being underestimated, a feeling that had fueled her ambition for decades. She'd built an empire by proving people wrong, and something told her this morning would be no exception. The question wasn't whether she'd face discrimination, the question was how her own staff would handle the test she was about to give them. What happened next would determine whether this clinic deserved to carry her name. If you believe everyone deserves dignity in healthcare regardless of how they dress, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. This story is far from over, and trust me, you won't want to miss what Dr. Sacks does next. Subscribe, because justice in healthcare is something we all need to witness. Right at that moment, Dr. Sacks stepped up to the pristine reception desk, and the first crack in her perfect world began to show. The receptionist, a perfectly manicured woman named Jessica, whose blonde highlights probably cost more than most people's rent, looked up from her computer screen with the kind of expression reserved for unwelcome interruptions. Her eyes performed a slow, deliberate scan from Dr. Sacks' worn sneakers to her makeup-free face, and something cold flickered across her features. "Excuse me, doctor," Sacks said politely, her voice carrying the same professional tone she'd used in boardrooms with Fortune 500 executives. "I'd like to schedule an appointment for a dermatology consultation." Jessica's perfectly glossed lips curved into what might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "I'm sorry, but we don't take walk-ins off the street," she replied, her tone suggesting that Dr. Sacks had just asked for something completely unreasonable. "Our appointment book is completely full for the next 6 months. You might want to try the community clinic across town. They're more suited to your situation." The words hit like a slap, but Dr. Sacks had expected this. What she hadn't expected was the casual cruelty in Jessica's voice, the way she emphasized situation as if poverty were contagious. Behind her calm exterior, Dr. Sacks felt the familiar fire that had driven her through medical school when professors questioned whether she belonged there. "I understand you're busy, doctor," Sacks continued, maintaining her composure while internally cataloging every microaggression. "But I noticed your waiting room seems quite empty. Perhaps you have a cancellation." Jessica's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I think you're confused about the type of establishment this is. We provide premium medical services to established clients. Here's a pamphlet for the Hope Community Clinic. They accept Medicaid and sliding scale payments." The pamphlet landed on the marble counter with a dismissive flick, its edges crisp and obviously prepared for exactly these moments. "Doctor." Sacks stared at it, remembering the countless times she'd been handed similar materials, the assumption that her skin color automatically determined her insurance status, her income, her worth. But then something remarkable happened that crystallized everything wrong with this picture. The glass doors whispered open, and a white woman in designer yoga pants and a Lululemon top strolled in, her hair in the same casual ponytail style as Dr. Sacks, her face equally free of makeup. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether she belonged anywhere. "Hi there," the woman chirped, approaching the desk with a bright smile. "I know this is super last minute, but I was wondering if you had any openings today. I'm visiting from California and heard amazing things about this place." Jessica's transformation was instant and stunning. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, her posture straightened, and suddenly the impossible became possible. "Of course, let me see what we can do for you," she gushed, fingers flying across her keyboard. "Dr. Martinez had a cancellation at 2:30. Would that work for you?" Dr. Sacks watched this exchange with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a controlled experiment. Same casual attire, same lack of appointment, same request for service. The only variable was skin color, and apparently that variable determined everything. The woman in yoga pants was handed a welcome packet offered coffee, and asked about her preferences for treatment rooms. Meanwhile, Dr. Sacks still stood there holding a pamphlet for a clinic that she had actually helped fund through her foundation's community outreach program. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. "Interesting," Dr. Sacks murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, but Jessica heard it, and her head snapped up with the sharp attention of someone who'd been caught in the act. "Is there a problem?" Jessica asked, her tone carrying a warning that suggested Dr. Sacks should know her place and leave quietly. What Jessica didn't know was that Dr. Sacks had built her entire career on not knowing her place, and this conversation was just getting started. But the tragedy had not stopped yet. What happened next would prove that Jessica's discrimination wasn't an isolated incident, it was a carefully orchestrated system, and Dr. Sacks was about to discover just how deep the rot went in her own clinic. "Actually, yes, there is a problem," Dr. Sacks replied calmly, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had faced down hospital boards and insurance executives. "I'm simply asking for the same service you just offered to another walk-in patient." Jessica's face flushed, but instead of backing down, she doubled down on her prejudice. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. This is a private medical facility, and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who can't provide proper documentation of their ability to pay." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke, but Dr. Sacks remained perfectly composed, her years of dealing with institutional racism serving as armor against the insult. What Jessica didn't notice was the subtle movement of Dr. Sacks's hand, activating the voice recording app on her phone and adjusting her designer glasses that looked ordinary but contained technology that would make a spy jealous. "I haven't raised my voice once," Dr. Sacks observed quietly, "but I'm curious about this documentation requirement. Was the other patient asked for proof of payment?" That's when the situation escalated beyond Jessica's control. A nurse in pristine scrubs emerged from the back office, her expression stern and unwelcoming. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone suggesting that Dr. Sacks was the source of any trouble. "This woman is being disruptive," Jessica explained, her voice taking on the victimized tone of someone who'd been caught in wrongdoing but refused to acknowledge it. "She's demanding an appointment without proper verification." The nurse, whose name tag read Supervisor Linda, looked Dr. Sacks up and down with the same dismissive assessment that Jessica had performed. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and provide insurance documentation, or I'll need to call security." Dr. Sacks felt a familiar chill run down her spine. How many times had she heard those words throughout her career? How many times had her calm professionalism been labeled as aggression, her legitimate requests dismissed as demands? The difference was that this time she had the power to do something about it. "I'm speaking at normal volume," Dr. Sacks replied, her voice steady as granite, "and I'm simply asking for the same treatment offered to other patients. But please, do call security. I think they'll find this situation very interesting." Behind her glasses, a small LED blinked red, indicating that everything was being recorded in high definition and automatically uploaded to a secure server. Her executive assistant, monitoring the live feed from the office, was already taking notes and preparing documentation that would be needed for what was about to unfold. Linda's eyes narrowed, and she whispered something to Jessica that Dr. Sacks' enhanced audio system picked up clearly. "Some people just don't know their place. Should I get Marcus from security?" The casual cruelty of the comment, the assumption that Dr. Sacks needed to be put in her place, ignited something deep in her chest. But she'd learned long ago that the best revenge was not anger, it was success, and she was about to serve up success in ways that neither Jessica nor Linda could imagine. "You know what?" Dr. Sacks said, reaching into her backpack with deliberate slowness. "I think you're absolutely right. I should know my place." What she pulled out next would change everything, but not in the way anyone expected. The foundation of their comfortable prejudice was about to crumble, and Dr. Sacks was just getting started. No one expected what happened next, but sometimes The most powerful moments come from the most unlikely sources. As Dr. Sacks reached into her backpack, the tension in the reception area was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Jessica and Linda stood like predators, circling what they believed was wounded prey, but they had no idea that the tables were about to turn in the most unexpected way. From the corner of the pristine lobby, a quiet voice cut through the hostility, like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. "Dr. Sacks?" The voice belonged to Marcus Williams, the evening janitor who was finishing his shift. His uniform was simple, his presence humble, but his eyes held the recognition that Jessica and Linda had completely missed. "Are you here for an inspection today?" The question hung in the air like a bomb with a lit fuse. Marcus had worked at the clinic for 3 years, ever since Dr. Sacks had personally approved his hiring after meeting him at a community job fair. He'd been struggling to support his family after losing his factory job, and Dr. Sacks had seen something in him that others had overlooked: integrity, dedication, and a genuine care for people that couldn't be taught. Jessica's head snapped around, her perfectly styled hair whipping as she stared at Marcus with pure confusion. "What did you just call her?" she demanded, her voice rising an octave as the first crack appeared in her confident facade. Marcus looked between Dr. Sacks and the hostile reception staff, his weathered face showing the wisdom of someone who had worked hard jobs his entire life and learned to read people with survival-level accuracy. He'd seen Dr. Sacks' picture in the employee handbook, had attended the clinic's opening ceremony where she'd spoken about dignity in healthcare, and he recognized her immediately despite her casual attire. "I said Dr. Sacks," Marcus replied calmly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. "She's the—" "Marcus." Linda's voice cracked like a whip across the lobby. "You need to get back to work immediately. This doesn't concern you." But Marcus wasn't intimidated. He'd faced down worse than a supervisor's anger, and he'd learned from Dr. Sacks's own example that sometimes doing the right thing meant standing up to people who thought they had power over you. "With respect, Supervisor Linda, I think it concerns all of us when—" "I said get back to work." Linda's face was flushed red now, her professional composure cracking under the pressure of a situation that was spiraling beyond her control. "Security concerns are not your department." As Linda practically dragged Marcus toward the supply closet, another witness emerged from the shadows of the clinic's pristine corridors. David Chen, a first-year medical intern rotating through the clinic, had been returning from his lunch break when he heard the commotion. Unlike the permanent staff, David was still fresh from medical school, where discussions of healthcare equity and implicit bias were no longer whispered about in back rooms, but taught as essential components of ethical medicine. David had been watching the entire interaction unfold, his phone discreetly recording from behind a pillar near the patient education area. As a young Asian American man who had faced his own share of discrimination in medical settings, he recognized the patterns playing out before him with crystal clarity. The differential treatment, the assumptions about payment ability, the escalating hostility toward a patient who was simply asking for equal service, it was a textbook case of healthcare discrimination. What struck David most was not just the blatant prejudice, but the systematic nature of it. Jessica's dismissal, Linda's threats, the casual cruelty of their whispered comments. This wasn't individual bias. This was institutional racism operating at full throttle. His medical training had taught him to document everything, and his conscience wouldn't let him stand by while witnessing such clear ethical violations. From his hidden position, David watched as Dr. Sacks maintained her remarkable composure despite the escalating hostility. He'd seen patients break down under far less pressure, seen grown men reduced to tears by medical staff who wielded their authority like weapons. But this woman in the hoodie and sweatpants stood like a pillar of strength, absorbing every insult and microaggression while somehow remaining perfectly calm. Dr. Sacks, meanwhile, was conducting her own form of clinical observation. Through her smart glasses, she was documenting everything, not just the overt discrimination, but the subtle body language, the way other staff members looked the other way, the systematic nature of the exclusion. Her executive assistant, monitoring the live feed from the corporate office, was already preparing legal documentation and reviewing employment contracts. The other patients in the waiting room had noticed the commotion too. The woman in yoga pants who had been welcomed so warmly was now shifting uncomfortably in her Italian leather chair, her face showing the dawning realization that she had been part of something ugly. An elderly white gentleman lowered his magazine and frowned at the treatment he was witnessing, while a young mother pulled her child closer, clearly uncomfortable with the hostile atmosphere. But it was Marcus who provided the most devastating testimony. As Linda forced him toward the supply closet, his voice carried across the lobby one more time. "She built this place, you know. Dr. Sacks built this whole clinic. Her name's right there on the wall behind you." Jessica's head whipped around to look at the brass nameplate she walked past every single day but had never bothered to read. For the first time since Dr. Sacks had entered the building, uncertainty flickered across her face. Linda's grip on Marcus's arm tightened, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was about to grow into something that would change everything. David continued recording, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. He knew he was witnessing something that would be talked about in medical ethics classes for years to come, and he was determined to capture every moment of it. Dr. Sacks looked around the lobby, taking in the faces of the patients who were now watching with fascination, the staff who were beginning to realize they might be in over their heads, and the two unlikely allies who had risked their positions to speak truth to power. The moment was perfect. Everyone was paying attention. The evidence was overwhelming, and the stage was set for the revelation that would shake this clinic to its foundation. "You know what, Marcus?" Dr. Sacks said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence in the lobby. "You're absolutely right. I should know my place." What she did next would make medical history, but more importantly, it would prove that dignity isn't determined by what you wear, it's determined by what you stand for. If you believe that every patient deserves respect regardless of their appearance, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you think should happen next. This story is about to reach its explosive climax, and trust me, you won't want to miss Dr. Sacks' moment of truth. Subscribe because justice in healthcare affects all of us, and this is just the beginning. Right at that moment, the entire atmosphere in the clinic shifted as Dr. Sacks reached the point of no return. What happened next would be talked about in medical circles for decades, but nobody in that pristine lobby could have predicted the seismic shift that was about to rock their world. Dr. Sacks stood in the center of the marble floor, surrounded by the hostile energy of Jessica and Linda, the uncomfortable silence of the other patients, and the watchful eyes of her unlikely allies. The weight of every discriminatory comment, every dismissive glance, every assumption about her worth based on her appearance had built to this crescendo moment. But instead of anger, her face showed something far more powerful, the calm certainty of someone who is about to deliver justice with surgical precision. "You're absolutely right," Dr. Sacks said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent lobby with crystal clarity. "I don't belong here." She paused, letting the words hang in the air as Jessica's face began to show the first hint of triumph. "Because I built it, not stood in line for it." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that occurs when the entire world seems to stop spinning, when everyone present realizes they're witnessing something that will change everything they thought they knew about power, privilege, and assumptions. With deliberate slowness, Dr. Sacks reached up and pulled off her Howard University hoodie, revealing a crisp, white button-down shirt underneath. But it wasn't the shirt that made Jessica's face drain of color. It was the ID badge that Dr. Sacks pulled from her backpack and clipped to her collar. The badge that read, "Dr. Nia Sacks, founder and CEO, Sacks Medical Solutions, in bold, unmistakable letters. "No," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible as she stared at the badge, then at the brass nameplate behind her desk that she'd walked past thousands of times without reading. "No, that's not. You can't be." But Dr. Sacks wasn't finished. She reached into her backpack again and pulled out a leather portfolio, opening it to reveal official documentation that left no room for doubt. Articles from Medical Journal featuring her on the cover, photos of her at the clinic's grand opening ceremony, letters from the governor thanking her for her contributions to healthcare equity. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Jessica's assumptions, a piece of evidence that the woman she'd dismissed as not belonging was actually the person who owned everything around them. Linda's face had gone from red to pale white, her hands trembling as the full magnitude of what they'd done began to sink in. She'd threatened to call security on the woman who signed the security company's paychecks. She'd told the founder of the clinic to know her place. She'd whispered about people not knowing where they belonged to the very person who had created this place from nothing. "This is impossible," Linda stammered, her voice cracking under the pressure of disbelief. "You're not. You can't be. You're just." "Just what?" Dr. Sacks asked, her voice gentle but carrying the weight of decades of facing exactly this kind of prejudice. "Just a black woman in casual clothes? Just someone who doesn't look like your idea of a CEO? Just a person who you assumed didn't deserve basic human dignity?" The other patients in the waiting room were riveted, their magazines forgotten, as they watched the most dramatic reversal of fortune any of them had ever witnessed. The woman in yoga pants looked mortified, clearly understanding that she'd been part of a system that had just exposed its ugly underbelly. The elderly gentleman was shaking his head in disgust, while the young mother was explaining to her child in hushed tones that what they'd witnessed was wrong. David, still recording from his hidden position, felt his heart pounding as he captured every moment of this historic confrontation. This wasn't just about one clinic or one instance of discrimination. This was about every assumption that had ever been made about who deserved respect, who belonged in positions of power, and who had the right to demand equal treatment. Marcus, despite Linda's earlier attempts to silence him, stepped forward from the supply closet area, his face showing a mixture of vindication and concern. He'd tried to warn them, tried to save them from their own prejudice, but they'd been too blinded by their assumptions to listen. But the most powerful moment came when Dr. Sacks turned to look directly at the brass nameplate behind the reception desk, the nameplate that bore her name in elegant script, the nameplate that had been there since the day the clinic opened, the nameplate that nobody had bothered to read because they'd already decided she wasn't important enough to matter. "That nameplate," Dr. Sacks said quietly, pointing to the wall behind Jessica's desk, "has been there for 3 years. 3 years of patients walking past it. 3 years of staff seeing it every single day. But I'm guessing you've never actually read it, have you, Jessica?" Jessica's eyes followed Dr. Sacks's finger to the nameplate, and for the first time, she actually read the words that had been in front of her face for her entire employment. Meridian Wellness Clinic. Founded by Dr. Nia Sacks, Maryland, 2021. The irony was so complete, so devastating, that it would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, her hand flying to her mouth as the full reality hit her like a freight train. "Oh my God, what have we done?" Dr. Sacks looked around the lobby one more time, taking in the faces of everyone who had witnessed this moment, the patients who had seen discrimination in action, the staff who had revealed their true character, the allies who had tried to speak up, and the intern who had documented it all. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been judged by their appearance, every patient who had been denied dignity, every individual who had been told they didn't belong. "What you've done, Doctor," Sacks said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just reclaimed her power, "is show me exactly what kind of culture exists in my clinic, and that's about to change. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon against prejudice isn't anger, it's accountability. But the real shock was yet to come. What Dr. Sacks did next would prove that true power isn't about revenge, it's about systematic change. And she was about to demonstrate exactly what that looked like when wielded by someone who had built an empire on the principle that everyone deserves dignity. Dr. Sacks pulled out her phone with the calm precision of a surgeon preparing for a critical operation. The lobby fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and Jessica's barely controlled breathing. Every eye was fixed on this woman who had just transformed from dismissed patient to the most powerful person in the building. "Activate Clinic Audit Protocol Sigma," Dr. Sacks said into her phone, her voice carrying the authoritative tone that had commanded boardrooms and hospital committees across the nation. The words seemed to echo off the marble walls like a judge's gavel, sealing a verdict. Within 30 seconds, the glass doors of the clinic whispered open, and Dr. Sacks's executive team walked in with the coordinated precision of a SWAT unit. Her chief operations officer, Dr. Michael Torres, led the group, followed by her legal counsel, Sarah Kim, and her human resources director, James Washington. Each carried tablets and official documentation, their faces showing the serious professionalism of people who had been preparing for this moment. "Dr. Sacks," Dr. Torres said, his voice respectful but urgent, "we've been monitoring the situation via your live feed. Legal has already prepared the necessary documentation for immediate action." Jessica and Linda watched in growing horror as they realized that everything they'd said and done had been recorded, documented, and transmitted in real time to a team of executives who were now prepared to act on it. The smart glasses Dr. Sacks had worn weren't just recording, they were broadcasting everything to a command center that had been analyzing their behavior with clinical precision. "Ma'am," Sarah Kim addressed Dr. Sacks while opening her tablet, "we've reviewed the footage and audio recordings. We have clear documentation of discriminatory treatment, hostile behavior toward patients, and violation of multiple corporate policies regarding patient dignity and equal treatment." The other patients in the waiting room watched in fascination as they witnessed corporate accountability in action. This wasn't just about one woman being mistreated. This was about systematic change happening before their eyes, a master class in how to address institutional discrimination with swift, decisive action. Dr. Sacks turned to address Jessica and Linda directly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent years fighting for healthcare equity. "Effective immediately, all patient services are suspended pending a complete operational review. Jessica Thompson and Linda Rodriguez, you are hereby suspended from duty pending a full investigation into your conduct and adherence to company policies." The words hit Jessica like physical blows. "Dr. Sacks, please, I didn't know. I never meant this as just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Dr. Sacks replied, her voice gentle but firm. "You told me I don't belong here. You handed me a pamphlet for a community clinic while welcoming another patient with identical circumstances. You threatened to call security on me for asking for equal treatment. Which part of that was a misunderstanding?" Linda stepped forward, her face desperate. "Dr. Sacks, we can explain. There are protocols, procedures we follow." "There are indeed protocols," James Washington interrupted, consulting his tablet. Company Policy 2.3 clearly states that all patients will be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of appearance, race, or perceived economic status. Policy 4.1 mandates that appointment availability be offered equally to all qualified patients. Policy 7.2 requires that staff maintain professional demeanor at all times. You've violated all three. Meanwhile, David Chen stepped forward from his hidden position, his phone still recording. "Dr. Sacks, I'm David Chen, first-year intern. I've documented the entire interaction from multiple angles. I felt it was important to have evidence of what I witnessed." Dr. Sacks turned to David with the first genuine smile she'd shown since entering the clinic. "David, your integrity in documenting this situation shows exactly the kind of character we need in medicine. Your actions today demonstrate the courage that real healthcare professionals must have. But the most powerful moment came when Dr. Sacks addressed the other patients who had witnessed the discrimination. I want to personally apologize to each of you for witnessing this treatment in a facility that bears my name. Healthcare should be a place of healing and dignity for everyone, and what you saw today falls far short of that standard. The woman in yoga pants stood up, her face showing genuine remorse. Dr. Sacks, I'm ashamed that I was part of this. I should have spoken up when I saw how differently you were being treated. Your recognition of that is the beginning of change, Dr. Sacks replied. Silence in the face of discrimination makes us all complicit. As the audit team began sealing documents and reviewing patient files, Dr. Sacks made one more call. David, would you be willing to upload your footage to social media? With proper context about systemic healthcare discrimination, of course. The world needs to see what happens when assumptions replace humanity. David nodded eagerly. Already prepared, Dr. Sacks. I've written a comprehensive post about healthcare equity and implicit bias. This footage will be part of a larger conversation about dignity in medical settings. Within hours, the video would be viral, shared across platforms with hashtags like #HealthcareEquity and #DignityMatters. News outlets would pick up the story, medical schools would use it as a case study, and policymakers would cite it in discussions about healthcare discrimination. But for Dr. Sacks, the real victory wasn't in the viral moment, it was in Marcus stepping forward, no longer afraid to speak truth to power, and in David's courage to document injustice. It was in the other patients who now understood their role in either perpetuating or challenging discrimination. This clinic will reopen, Dr. Sacks announced to the assembled group, but not until we've rebuilt the culture from the ground up. Because healthcare isn't just about treating disease, it's about treating people with the dignity they deserve. What happened next would prove that real change requires more than just consequences, requires transformation. No one expected what Dr. Sacks would do next, but what unfolded over the following 60 days would prove that true leadership isn't about punishment, it's about transformation. And she was about to demonstrate how to turn a moment of injustice into a movement for lasting change. The Meridian Wellness Clinic stood empty for exactly 60 days, its doors sealed with official notices that read temporarily closed for systemic restructuring. But behind those closed doors, something remarkable was happening. Dr. Sacks had assembled a team of healthcare equity specialists, community leaders, and reformed staff members who were working around the clock to rebuild not just policies, but the very soul of the institution. The transformation began with Jessica and Linda, who found themselves at a crossroads that would define the rest of their careers. Dr. Sacks had given them a choice that nobody expected: termination with severance, or participation in an intensive rehabilitation program that would require them to confront their own biases and work directly with the communities they had discriminated against. I don't understand, Jessica had said during their first meeting with Dr. Sacks and the diversity consultant. You're giving us a second chance after what we did? Dr. Sacks looked at her with the same calm intensity that had characterized her entire career. Jessica, I believe people can change, but only if they're willing to do the hard work of understanding why they acted the way they did. The question is, are you willing to look in the mirror and change what you see? The program Dr. Sacks designed was unlike anything in corporate America. Jessica and Linda were required to spend 30 hours a week working in community health clinics, directly serving the populations they had dismissed. They attended weekly bias training sessions, participated in community forums where they listened to stories of healthcare discrimination, and worked with mentors who had experienced the kind of treatment they had inflicted on others. Linda broke down during the third week of the program. I never thought of myself as racist, she sobbed during a group session. I thought I was just doing my job, maintaining standards. But listening to these stories, seeing how my actions affected real people, I was everything I claimed not to be. Dr. Sacks observed these sessions not with satisfaction, but with the clinical interest of someone studying human behavior. "The hardest part of change," she told the group, "is admitting that our intentions don't excuse our impact. Good intentions paired with discriminatory actions still cause harm." Meanwhile, Marcus Williams found his life transformed in ways he never could have imagined. Dr. Sacks had promoted him to Patient Relations Supervisor, a newly created position that put him in charge of ensuring that every patient felt welcomed and valued from the moment they walked through the doors. Dr. Sacks, Marcus had said when she offered him the position, "I don't have a college degree. I don't have management experience. Are you sure about this?" "Marcus," she replied, "you have something that can't be taught in any classroom. The courage to speak up when you see injustice, even when it might cost you your job. That's the kind of leadership this clinic needs." David Chen's role in documenting the discrimination had earned him something even more valuable than viral FMEA direct mentorship with Dr. Sacks herself. She had offered him a position in her Healthcare Equity Research Division, where he would help develop protocols for identifying and addressing bias in medical settings. "Your footage didn't just expose discrimination," Dr. Sacks told him during their first mentorship meeting. "It showed the world what courage looks like. You risked your career to do what was right, and that's the kind of integrity that will make you an exceptional physician." The clinic's reopening was planned not as a grand celebration, but as a quiet demonstration of transformed values. The marble floors remained, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The new staff had been hired not just for their medical credentials, but for their commitment to healthcare equity. Training programs focused on implicit bias recognition, cultural competency, and patient dignity were mandatory for all employees. But the most revolutionary change was the clinic's new mission. Dr. Sacks had converted it into a hybrid model half-traditional practice for paying patients, half-free equity clinic for underserved communities. The same luxurious treatment rooms that had once been reserved for celebrities now welcomed patients regardless of their ability to pay. "We're not just treating medical conditions," Dr. Sacks explained to the new staff during orientation. "We're treating the systemic inequities that have plagued healthcare for generations. Every patient who walks through these doors deserves the same level of care, respect, and dignity." The community response was overwhelming. Patients who had been turned away from other facilities found themselves welcomed with open arms. Families who had never experienced high-quality healthcare suddenly had access to state-of-the-art treatment. The waiting room, once filled with uncomfortable tension, now buzzed with genuine warmth and inclusivity. Even more remarkable was what happened to Jessica and Linda. After completing their 6-month rehabilitation program, both women had been transformed. Jessica had requested to continue working in community health, discovering a passion for serving underserved populations that she never knew existed. Linda had become one of the clinic's most effective advocates for patient rights, using her experience to help train other staff members about the real impact of discrimination. "I can't undo what I did," Jessica said during a staff meeting 6 months after the incident, "but I can spend the rest of my career making sure it never happens again, doctor." Sacks didn't just give me a second chance, he gave me a purpose. The ripple effects extended far beyond the clinic walls. Other medical facilities began implementing similar equity programs. Medical schools started requiring courses on healthcare discrimination. Professional organizations developed new standards for patient treatment that specifically addressed bias and dignity. Dr. Sacks had proven that institutional change was possible, but it required more than policy updates. It required a fundamental shift in how people thought about their role in either perpetuating or challenging discrimination. The clinic's new motto, etched in elegant script where the old nameplate had been, read, "Excellence in medicine begins with excellence in humanity." What happened next would prove that the impact of one moment of courage could transform not just one clinic, but an entire approach to healthcare equity. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. 6 months after that fateful Tuesday morning, Dr. Sacks stood in front of the transformed clinic, preparing to answer a question that would define not just her legacy, but the future of healthcare equity across the nation. The media had gathered for what they thought would be a routine follow-up story about the viral discrimination incident. Local news stations, national networks, and healthcare journalists had all come to document the clinic's reopening and the remarkable transformation that had taken place. But what they witnessed instead was something that would be quoted in medical textbooks and policy papers for generations to come. A reporter from CNN stepped forward, her microphone extended toward Dr. Sacks. Dr. Sacks, it's been 6 months since the incident that shocked the healthcare industry. You've transformed this clinic, changed lives, and sparked a national conversation about dignity in medicine. Looking back at everything that's happened, what do you call what took place here today? Dr. Sacks paused, looking back at the clinic that had become a symbol of transformation. Through the glass doors, she could see Marcus Williams greeting patients with the same warmth he'd shown her that difficult morning. She could see David Chen, now completing his residency while leading biased training sessions for medical students. She could see Jessica working alongside community health advocates, her face showing the genuine compassion that had been buried under years of institutional prejudice. "What do I call it?" Dr. Sacks repeated, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent her entire career fighting for this moment. She looked directly into the camera, knowing that her words would reach millions of people who had experienced similar discrimination in healthcare settings. "I call it surgical justice." The phrase hung in the air like a perfect diagnosis, precise, powerful, and absolutely accurate. Surgical justice. Not the crude justice of revenge or retaliation, but the precise, careful justice of a skilled surgeon removing a cancer from the body of healthcare itself. "You see," Dr. Sacks continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "when a surgeon operates, they don't just cut out the diseased tissue. They rebuild. They heal. They create something stronger than what was there before. That's what real justice looks like, not just removing the problem, but creating a healthier system that prevents the problem from returning." The reporter pressed further, clearly sensing that this moment was becoming something historic. "And what would you say to other healthcare institutions that might be watching this story?" Dr. Sacks smiled. The same calm smile that had carried her through medical school, through building her empire, and through that morning when she'd been told she didn't belong. "I'd say that dignity isn't a luxury that only some patients deserve. It's the foundation of medicine itself. And if your institution can't provide that dignity to every patient who walks through your doors, then you're not practicing medicine, you're practicing discrimination." Behind her, the news sign for the clinic gleamed in the afternoon sun. Sacks Equity Center, because care shouldn't judge clothing. The words weren't just a motto, they were a promise, a commitment to every patient who had ever been made to feel less than worthy of quality health care. But the most powerful moment came when Dr. Sacks turned to address the patients who had gathered to witness this historic moment. In the crowd were people from all walks of life, the elderly gentleman who had witnessed the original discrimination, the young mother who had used the incident to teach her child about fairness, and dozens of patients who had been transformed by the clinic's new approach to healthcare equity. To every person who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong in a place that should welcome them, Dr. Sacks said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "I want you to know that your dignity is not negotiable. Your worth is not determined by your appearance, your income, or your insurance status. You belong everywhere that healing happens, and it's time our healthcare system started acting like it." The crowd erupted in applause, but Dr. Sacks wasn't finished. She had one more message, one that would resonate far beyond the boundaries of healthcare and into every institution where discrimination still thrived. "Change doesn't happen when we ignore problems or hope they'll go away," she said. "Change happens when we have the courage to put on our work clothes, walk into the places that need us most, and show them what equality looks like. Sometimes you have to be willing to be underestimated in order to deliver the kind of justice that transforms everything." As the cameras rolled and the story spread across social media, The hashtag number surgical justice began trending worldwide. Medical students shared the video in their ethics classes. Healthcare administrators used it in diversity training. Policymakers referenced it in debates about healthcare reform. But for Dr. Sacks, the real victory was smaller and more personal. It was the thank you note from a young black girl who had received her first quality healthcare at the Equity Center. It was the transformation she saw in Jessica's eyes as she helped a patient who reminded her of the person she used to dismiss. It was the pride in Marcus's voice as he told his family about his promotion and the difference he was making every day. 6 months later, the Sacks Equity Center had become a model for healthcare institutions across the country. Medical schools were requiring courses on healthcare equity. Professional organizations had developed new standards for patient treatment. And most importantly, patients who had never felt welcome in medical settings were finally receiving the care they deserved. Dr. Sacks stood in her office, looking out at the busy clinic below, watching as patients of all backgrounds received the same high-quality care in the same luxurious setting. The marble floors remained, but they now reflected something different, not exclusivity, but the simple truth that everyone deserves to feel valued when they're seeking healing. The final text overlay appeared on screen as the story concluded. Type justice if you believe dignity isn't a luxury. Within hours, millions of people had typed that single word, creating a digital movement that would continue to grow, proving that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with one person refusing to accept that they don't belong. Dr. Sacks had proven that surgical justice wasn't just possible, it was essential, and the healing had only just begun. What Dr. Sacks accomplished that day wasn't just about one clinic or one moment of discrimination, it was about something far more powerful. As someone who's spent years studying healthcare equity, I can tell you that what you just witnessed represents the difference between treating symptoms and curing the disease. Most organizations respond to discrimination with apologies and superficial policy changes, but Dr. Sacks demonstrated what real transformation looks like when you have the courage to perform surgical justice. The profound lesson here isn't that we should all become undercover bosses to catch bad behavior, that dignity should never depend on recognition, wealth, or appearance. Every Jessica and Linda in this story represents a system that judges worth by clothing rather than character, and every Marcus and David represents the choice we all have to either perpetuate injustice or stand up against it, even when it's uncomfortable. What moves me most about this story is how Dr. Sacks proved that true power isn't about revenge, it's about rehabilitation. She could have simply fired everyone and moved on, but instead, she chose the harder path of transformation, giving people the chance to confront their biases and become better versions of themselves. That's the kind of leadership that doesn't just change policies, it changes hearts. The reality is that discrimination in healthcare isn't rare, it's systemic. Patients are judged by their appearance, their accent, their zip code, and their insurance status every single day. But stories like this prove that change is possible when we refuse to accept that some people deserve less dignity than others. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the assumptions you make about others, or if it inspired you to speak up the next time you witness injustice, then smash that like button and let me know in the comments what surgical justice means to you. Subscribe to this channel because we're building a community of people who believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of what they're wearing or where they come from. Hit that notification bell because these stories of transformation and justice are exactly what our world needs right now. And trust me, the next story will be even more powerful than this one.